There's a particular kind of magic that lived in the second half of the 20th century, a texture to everyday life that you couldn't quite bottle, and if you were lucky enough to be a kid back then, you probably didn't even realize how special it was until it was gone. No phones buzzing in your pocket. No algorithm deciding what you'd watch next. Just a slower, stickier, static-filled world that hummed along on its own peculiar rhythm. So settle in, because we're about to take a long, winding drive back through the decades, and like any good road trip, we're starting exactly where those memories usually did, in the backseat, or better yet, the way back. Before minivans had built-in screens and cup holders for every possible beverage, families piled into station wagons for road trips that could stretch on for hours, sometimes days, with nothing but the hum of the highway and whatever games you could invent to pass the time. There was no air conditioning in a lot of these cars, so the windows stayed down, hair whipping around, and if you were one of the lucky kids, you got to claim the way back, that magical rear-facing cargo area where seat belts were more of a suggestion than a rule. From back there, the whole world unspooled behind you instead of in front of you, and there was nothing quite like locking eyes with the driver in the car behind you and making the silliest face you could manage, just to see if you could get a laugh out of a total stranger doing 70 on the interstate. And when those road trips led to the grocery store or the gas station, there was a good chance you'd walk away with something almost as exciting as candy, trading stamps. S&H green stamps, blue chip stamps, little strips of adhesive back paper handed out based on how much you spent, and it became a whole family ritual to sit around the kitchen table licking and pasting them into paper booklets. It was tedious, sticky work, but there was real anticipation behind it, because once you filled enough books, you could trade them in for something substantial, a toaster, a lamp, sometimes even a full patio furniture set. It was like a slow-motion treasure hunt that the whole family played together, one grocery run at a time. Of course, those long days eventually came to an end, and so did the television. It's strange to think about now, but there was a time when TV didn't run all night. Around 10 o'clock, stations would sign off entirely, often playing the national anthem as a farewell before the screen dissolved into that hissing black and white test pattern, the one with the circle and the crosshairs that somehow felt both comforting and a little eerie. And right around that same hour, you sometimes catch that famous public service announcement cutting through the static, "It's 10 o'clock. Do you know where your children are?" It was a simple line, but it marked something bigger, a nightly reminder that the day was truly over and it was time to come inside, wherever you were. But before bedtime, especially around the holidays, there was another kind of magic waiting in the mailbox. Thick, heavy catalogs from Sears or J.C. Penney would arrive, practically bursting at the seams with toys, and kids would disappear for hours with a pencil, circling every single thing they hoped to find under the tree. There was something almost sacred about flipping through those glossy pages, dog-earing your favorites, building an entire wish list one careful circle at a time. It wasn't just shopping. It was dreaming, laid out in print, and it made Christmas morning feel like the payoff to weeks of careful planning. As the years rolled on and VCRs found their way into living rooms, Friday nights took on a whole new ritual. Families would pile into the car for a trip to the local video store, wandering up and down aisles of plastic clamshell cases, debating over which movie would win out for the night. If you didn't own a VCR yet, some stores would even rent you the player itself, right alongside the tape. And heaven help you if you forgot to rewind before returning it, because that little "Be Kind" rewind sticker wasn't just a suggestion. It was basically the law of the land. Driving to get that movie meant grabbing your keys, and back then, that wasn't as simple as it sounds. Long before key fobs that could unlock your car from across a parking lot, most vehicles required two separate keys, an experience that feels almost quaint now. One key, usually round-headed, was for the doors. The other, square-headed, was strictly for the ignition. You had to know which was which, fumbling in the dark sometimes, and there was no pressing a button from 50 feet away. You walked up, you found the right key, and you got in the old-fashioned way. Once you were out of the car, though, freedom looked a little different for kids. Bicycles were basically transportation, exploration, and social life all rolled into one, and the only real rule most parents set was to be home when the streetlights came on. There was no need for cell phones or check-in calls. Kids would vanish for entire afternoons, riding from one end of the neighborhood to the other, and that soft amber glow flickering on overhead was the universal signal that dinner was close and it was time to pedal home. And if you needed to actually reach someone during those long afternoons, you didn't pull out a phone from your pocket. You reach for the phone book, an enormous, thick volume packed with white pages for personal numbers and yellow pages for local businesses. Looking up a number meant flipping through tissue-thin paper, running your finger down long columns of names, and if you needed a plumber or a pizza place, that yellow pages section was basically the internet of its day, just bound in newsprint and left on a shelf by the phone. Speaking of things left on shelves and sofas, no description of this era would be complete without mentioning the plastic furniture covers that seemed to exist in every grandmother's living room across America. These crinkly, clear plastic slip covers were meant to protect the good furniture from spills and stains, but what they mostly did was stick uncomfortably to the back of your legs on a hot summer day, creating that distinctive crackling sound every time you shifted in your seat. Nobody was allowed to actually sit on that furniture without permission, and even then, you sat carefully, as if the couch itself might complain. If you were lucky, though, Grandma might read to you before bed, and there's a good chance the book in her hands had that unmistakable gold foil spine. Little golden books were a staple of childhood bedtime for generations, affordable enough that a trip to the grocery store almost always came with a pleading request for a new one to add to the collection. Those stories, with their simple illustrations and gentle rhythms, became the soundtrack to countless bedtimes, read again and again until the pages softened at the edges. Saturday mornings brought their own kind of ritual, one built entirely around the television. Kids would wake up early, pour a bowl of cereal, and settle in for hours of cartoons, punctuated by loud, colorful commercials for toys and sugary snacks. It wasn't accidental, either. Those commercial breaks were carefully designed with distinct visual and audio cues specifically so young viewers could tell the difference between the show they were watching and the advertisement trying to sell them something. It was a strange kind of media literacy lesson, taught not in schools, but in cereal commercials. And when it came to actual toys, few things ruled the living room floor quite like G.I. Joe. Entire battles would unfold across carpets, complete with makeshift forts and dramatic sound effects supplied by whoever was playing narrator that day. Then, when it was time for school, those same kids would grab a metal lunchbox covered in their favorite characters, whether that meant Star Wars, Ghostbusters, or whatever franchise was dominating the playground that year. Carrying the right lunchbox wasn't just practical. It was practically a statement of identity. School itself came with its own set of rituals, some of them a little less thrilling than lunchbox debates. Typing class meant sitting in front of a heavy mechanical typewriter, learning to hit each key with enough force to actually make an impression, all while trying to master the rhythmic clatter of the keys and that satisfying metallic ding that signaled it was time for a manual carriage return. It was loud, it was physical, and it took real practice to get any speed at all. Outside of typing class, if you wanted to catch a movie, there was no scrolling through an app to check showtimes. You either grabbed the local newspaper and flipped to the entertainment section, scanning the small printed listings for theaters and times, or you called the theater directly and listened patiently to a recorded voice reading off the schedule. Either way, seeing a movie required a bit of planning and a little bit of patience. Getting to that movie theater usually meant a stop for gas, and gas stations back then offered something almost unimaginable today. Full service was simply the standard. An attendant would come out, pump your gas for you, check your oil and other fluids, and wash your windshield, all as part of a normal fill-up. You didn't even have to get out of the car. Back at school, some of the most memorable moments happened not in the classroom, but during those special days when the teacher wheeled out the film projector. There was a distinct hum and clicking sound as the machine ran, and threading the film through the sprockets was practically an art form, one that teachers often handed off to a trusted student volunteer, who would beam with pride at being chosen to help advance the reels. And if you wandered home after school into a house decorated in the height of 70s style, you'd likely find macramé everywhere. Those heavily knotted textile hangers, wall pieces, and room dividers were a defining decor trend of the era, woven from thick cord into intricate patterns that held potted plants suspended in living rooms across the country. And somehow, no matter the household, there was almost always an owl worked into the design somewhere, watching over the room from its knotted perch. Looking back at all of it now, the trading stamps, the two keys jangling together, the plastic-covered couches, the projector's steady click, it's easy to see how much has quietly disappeared. But these weren't just objects and routines. They were the small, shared rituals that shaped childhood and family life for generations, the kind of everyday magic you don't fully appreciate until decades later, when all that's left is the memory of it, still as warm and familiar as it ever was.